Hi, everybody. Bill Kenny here with Test My Pitch, and we're really excited to be with you today to talk about the idea of helping our team, the people that we're responsible for, helping them be successful. And ultimately, we know that our success is built on how successful we help our team be, and that's really what we want to help with today. So uh, we've had a lot of experiences over the last several months. We've been doing a lot of traveling around to various customers, various prospects, all sorts of different venues and different types of organizations. And over the next 5 webinars, over the next 5 months, we're going to hit 5 different topics, really areas that we see as huge opportunities for many of the organizations we work with. And the first is really about this notion of helping create team success and building that infrastructure appropriately. And it really actually seems even more timely when we think about what time of year it is, the idea that we can go into 2017 even more prepared, and ultimately our success is built on the success of those that work for us, or that we're responsible to help improve or motivate or educate, and that's really what we want to do. So I'm going to now hop into a slideshow. You should see the slides on screen here in just a moment, and what you'll see as we go, hang on a second, something strange happened here. So coming back on screen, let's see if we can do this. There we go. And I'm going to go here, and hopefully on your screen you're now seeing my slides. I'm just going to open up the slideshow. So what we're going to do over the next bit here is to get into this topic, and then we'll open it back up for questions. Certainly this quote from Colin Powell: "There are no secrets to success. It is the result of preparation, hard work, and learning from failure." Thought that might be a good way to get us started into this topic. In the audience today, we have managers and executives of companies. We have educators from universities and K through 12. And then we also have a variety of economic development people, those that are managing or executive directors of accelerators and incubators and all sorts of other economic development organizations. So the perspective that we'll share will endeavor to incorporate those different perspectives in ways that we can help create success for the people who we're responsible to manage and or help improve. We've received many questions, as you can see. What we're going to do is get into the topic, and then we're going to come back, and some of these we'll probably address along the way, and some will make sure that we address before we conclude today. So definitely some great questions. We do invite you to add your questions, so please feel free to add questions in a chat comment field so that we can address those, when we come back on screen at the end. So our agenda is pretty straightforward. We're going to give a little bit of background, then we're going to talk about sort of the bigger challenges that we've seen with respect to how do we set people up for success. And we'll talk about some remedies. I think you'll find the case studies we're going to talk through really interesting, so that should be good. And then again, we'll get to your questions. So let's hop into, just actually before we go into the background, just so you know a little bit about me, I'm the founder of Test My Pitch, and this is my 6th business that I've started. And I thankfully, as a part of what I do, I get to go around and meet really cool people, see some really cool organizations. And a lot of what we endeavor to do in these webinars is to share the best of what we see when we travel around. And one disclaimer to sort of throw out, and maybe valuable today as well, is we haven't seen everything. We're playing a movie sort of in our heads that is based on our experiences. Your experiences may vary. Hopefully we have some things in what we communicate today that you find valuable and are good takeaways for you. But certainly if you have things that are working well for you that contradict the point of view that we'll share, please keep doing what's working well for you. That's our intent, is only to be additive. So, but please give us your comments, give us your feedback. That will be really valuable. Also, so you have a little bit of context about our perspective and the type of work we do. We have two online tools. One is called Test My Pitch, and it's a platform that helps individuals, generally within organizations, improve their communication skills. So think of it like a batting cage, if you think of what baseball and softball players use to improve their batting skills. They both use it to sort of ramp up their skills, and then they also use it for remedial and warm-up exercises. But think of it as a batting cage for communication skill building. And then Score My Pitch is a pitch event judging and feedback system. So it allows very quick contextual feedback for live communication. Enough about us. So let's get into this topic. All right. So the background. First, we really kind of want to understand, what we're trying to do. If we do a really good job at helping our team or the people that we're working with, our students, our entrepreneurs, or our, potentially our salespeople, if we do a really good job of helping them be successful, what will be left behind, or what is the, what do we really have? And ultimately what we're looking to do is to create an infrastructure and processes that allow success to be systemic. And so the idea that we can create repeatable success as we get new students, as we get new entrepreneurs coming through our program, or as we get new employees, new staff, new salespeople, is that all of that benefit, or all of that infrastructure should be left behind, if you will, so that the next group can use it, or the next individual can use it to also be successful. And so the goal really is that we learn from this. And so ultimately, what we boil down the goal, we want to help individuals and teams become focused, to become independent, to become accountable, and then, of course, ultimately successful. So with this infrastructure and with these processes, we're going to help them become focused, independent, accountable, and ultimately successful. So let's get into these 4 challenges. So the first one that we see is and we see this a fair amount, a high percentage of the time as we go around, and that is the incongruence between the focus that an organization has, or the goals that they state. The goals that they have and the focus that they have. So in other words, they're doing activities, or they're helping their students or entrepreneurs or professionals do activities, or they're enabling activities that are incongruent with the desired outcome. Many years ago, we actually owned a weight loss business, and we'd see this a lot in weight loss, is that we would see people who wanted to be healthy or wanted to be thin, and but they wouldn't have the behaviors of somebody who's healthy and or thin. And so the idea that we should expect the results without the behavior is not realistic. And we see that a lot in organizations. So maybe a simple way to look at this, and I've just thrown a map up here on the screen, and let's just say, for example, we were in New Haven, Connecticut, which is not too far from where I am right now, and let's say we wanted to go to New York City. So we're going from sort of the upper right-hand corner down to the lower left-hand corner, and the highway that's illuminated there with the blue is Interstate I-95. It basically goes down the whole east coast of the U.S. So if we and that's a north-south road, even though it's sort of east-west here, it's north-south. Let's just imagine that we were traveling, we're in New Haven or somewhere near New Haven, and we're on I-95 north. So it doesn't matter how fast we drive or what lane we're in or any of that. We should not expect to get to New York, because I-95 north from New Haven does not go to New York. We'd have to get on I-95 south, and there may be other roads we could take. There may be alternatives, but the idea of expecting to get to New York, unless we're on the a road that goes there and going the right direction, is very incongruent. And so we need to make sure the behaviors that we have and that we instill that will get to the appropriate outcome. People that are working for us or that we're responsible to help in some way improve or to direct, they're relying on our skills and expertise. So we need to make sure that that congruency is there. So number two, feedback in general is not timely or contextual. We see tons and tons and tons of oral feedback, which is good. It's better than no feedback. And sometimes it's immediate. Sometimes it takes a while to come out. But the challenge of oral feedback is it's very difficult to understand what somebody means. And quite often when we get oral feedback, we're going to get one perspective, and we might actually get a couple of people who will give us oral feedback after something occurs, after we do something and we're being evaluated or whatnot. And so it's difficult to contextualize one person's oral feedback. It's nearly impossible to contextualize multiple people's. And why is it important to contextualize? Well, we want to know what to action, and we want to make it really easy for people to action what will improve them in some way or help them get to the objectives that they and or we have set. And so the more contextual it can be, the more instructive it can be. And that might mean that it's quantitative and qualitative. It might mean that it is has some relevance and or some referential aspect to it. In other words, I can refer to a peer group and sort of myself versus that peer group, but so that I have some way to evaluate instead of sort of the abstract comments that might be made orally. Again, oral is better than nothing, but if we can add context, we're going to get much more out of it, and we're going to see people improve much quicker and much more aligned with the outcomes we're looking for. When we have degrading performance, in other words, when people are not, one or more people within a group are not performing up to a standard, it's going to affect all stakeholders. So it's going to erode the team because people will see examples of subpar performance, and it will also erode potentially our customer base. It will erode potentially other parts of the business. So there are a variety of effects that degrading performance can have. And flip it around. If you have star performers and they're reinforced, and there's a sort of a push to have everybody build their skills to the star level, it has the absolute opposite effect. So we'll see in organizations that have poor performers, they tend to attract more and more poor performers, and often it has nothing to do with the people. It has much more to do with the systems, with the management and the systems. And in fact, some of you may know the name Edward Deming. He was really popularized and modernized the whole notion of quality in corporations. He's known for is really the father of modern quality. And he said that 80% of problems in business are systems. They're not people. And it's funny because most people talk about, most managers, most executives talk about how important people are. And people are, the human capital is clearly very important, but we have to put people in situations for which they can succeed. And unfortunately, the infrastructure that we see in a lot of organizations does not reflect that. We put people very regularly in situations where they're going to fail, and it's very predictable. And so we need to make sure that not only does the individual succeed, but that sort of the team succeeds, and we have generally a more progressively more and more successful team, because we don't want to see this degradation. We want to see an amplification of success, not a degradation of performance. So yeah, this is a challenge when obviously the sort of it reminds me of the story that the deck chairs being rearranged on the Titanic. We want to make sure that our ship is floating high, and that that a rising tide lifts all boats, and not the reverse. So another big issue is that the previous experience in organizations with previous employees, with previous students, with previous entrepreneurs isn't leveraged. And so we have this sort of Darwinian approach with every new group or individual that comes in, is that we're going to start over. And we just sort of hit the reboot button and begin again. And so the previous group has little, or the current group has very little reference or benefit from the fact that there have been previous groups or individuals. And so there's no real benefit in that, when there has been incredible reference points that could be used to essentially accelerate how people begin and how they move forward. So we want to make sure that we've got methods and systems so that we leverage the previous experience. So let's hop into the remedies for our system. And I think the next two sections here, between the remedies and the case studies, we'll get a lot of good information out that hopefully will really help you. So first of all, we want to make sure we stay on the road. It's interesting, and this for some, and certainly based on some of the questions that were asked, the idea of having standards or keeping people constrained to certain activities seems limiting. I'm going to suggest that if we don't, we're going to have a much bigger failure, and that is that we're going to let people flounder. And so, the idea that there are lines on the roads keeps accidents from happening, keeps us able to drive at much faster speeds, allows us to go in a direction that's productive, and that that allows us to get somewhere effectively. So we want to make sure that this idea of staying in bounds or staying between the lines, if we can give people guideposts that actually get them to a desired outcome, it's going to be much more valuable. And you look at, there are lots of places where we use white lines. If we're on a track, we're going to go around in circles. That every one of the runners on this track is, if they're in different lanes here, there's some preference to inside versus outside lanes, and there's different pressures that puts on your body. But if we sort of neutralize that for the sake of this, is ultimately, no matter what lane you're in, you're going to have the same opportunity to be successful. And so we want to get people in a lane and get them to perform well. And as they perform well, we can, and we'll talk about this in some of the case studies, is as we do that, we're able to give them more liberties. And then if they plateau or begin to decline, we can come back to those standards. So we want to make sure that we're again setting people up for success and giving them some tools to find success much quicker, more effectively. Because if we don't, we run the risk of people turning over, of them becoming anti-sponsors of our organization, really, most of all, to lose their potential energy, their potential production. And so we certainly don't want to do that. Back to our map of going from New Haven to New York, you'll see actually an alternate route in gray on here. So the idea is that we can get to New York a lot of ways, and this is just highlighting one other alternate route, but we could, if we took the time, there are a variety of routes. Actually, about a third of the way towards New York, maybe a quarter of the way, you'll see the city of Bridgeport. There's actually a ferry that goes from there over to Port Jefferson, which is almost due south. It's just a little east, so southeast. And then we could take the ferry. We could go to New York, actually, via Long Island. There are all sorts of ways that we can get to New York. And so the point really isn't that we have to go a certain way, but on the other hand, if we've learned a really good way to go and we're working with, again, be it new students or new entrepreneurs or new staff members or even struggling individuals, the idea that we get them in a pathway that we know works. We don't have to test, we don't have to experiment. We know this way works. And again, as they find or re-find success, then we can open up the sort of let the leash out much more to allow them to experiment, allow them to find even better routes on their own. But the real goal and the first responsibility any of us have as leaders is to assure individual success. And we see a lot of challenges in that. So we talked about feedback. So there's some great tools out now. Many people have these, be it a Fitbit or similar device today, to give all sorts of feedback instantaneously about their activities. So the interesting thing about this, and where we see a lot of people fail, is they measure results, which we certainly want to know when we've accomplished something. But the thing that creates the results are the activities. And so when we look at feedback, the first thing we want to measure are the activities that somebody does. And do those activities, do those match up with the goals that someone has? And quite often, especially early on, the activities don't match up and in fact are totally incongruent with the outcomes that are desired. In fact, they say they want to go to New York, but they're on the road to Pennsylvania or the road to Canada or wherever. And so we need to make sure that we get people on the right road, and that's going to happen by measuring the activities, because the activities are going to be a leading indicator of the outcomes, and we're going to get much quicker feedback, and we're going to be able to be much better leaders if we can help people get the right habits and behaviors. Because we don't have to, it's funny, a good student generally doesn't have to worry about getting good grades. I'll tell you, a bad student has to worry a whole lot about getting good grades, because they're not doing the work that reflects or that causes good performance when it comes to tests and application. So we want to get this immediate and contextual feedback, and this can happen in a variety of ways. And we'll go into some scorecards later on, but this would be an example where we can give people, both quantitative and qualitative feedback on specific performances. So the third thing that we want to make sure that we do as leaders is we want to take responsibility. I kind of alluded to this a few minutes ago, is that we see a lot of times leaders, there could be a whole bunch of reasons why. Some people resist wanting to, or resist the idea of sort of mandating activities and getting getting people in the right rut. They want to just give the goal and let the person perform as well as they can towards that goal on their own. And then, I think the other part of this is that quite often we get caught by our past leniency. So, we historically have allowed X or Y, or we've seen people do P or Q, and ultimately, sometimes it just takes hitting the reset button and saying, what, that is, we know, even though for the last 2 years or 20 years we've sort of allowed this behavior, we know that's no longer going to create the success that we're aiming for. And as leaders, we would not be doing you service, that you being the student or the entrepreneur or the professional, we would not be supporting your goals in a productive way if we didn't focus on the right activities. And so we need to get into a place where we help you do the activities that will create the results that ultimately you and we are looking for. And so, help us through that. But it's our first responsibility is to you and to help you be successful. And this is what we need to do that. And so, the most amazing book on this topic, may know Stephen R. Covey, which this Stephen M. R. Covey is Stephen R. Covey's son. So this is a son of the man who wrote 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. This book, The Speed of Trust, is really phenomenal. And so there are several messages in here, and certainly I can't regurgitate the book in a minute or two here, but let me just add this point, is that everything we do around sort of setting standards within our organization or within our sort of ecosystem communicates. And when we stop applying the standards, or we indiscriminately apply the standards, then those that we work with lose trust in us. And so the first thing that we have to do, number one, is have standards, and two, we have to be very consistent and diligent in the application of those standards. And so, we can write standards that evolve to have some leniency or some open space, but we have to, and that that open space should be standard, not sort of willy-nilly. But the point really here is that we're going to build much better relationships, particularly with people who again, we're managing, supervising, teaching, and so on. If we number one, people want to be successful. So if we help them be successful, we're a long way ahead. But two is that we are consistent and reliable in terms of how we apply what we want people to do and what will help them be successful. But if we're centered on helping them be successful and indifferent to how they feel about us, I understand we all want to be loved, but the first thing is our first job is to help them be successful. And I would highly encourage everybody that's listening to this to read Speed of Trust. It is a great read. I think you'd really enjoy it. So the fourth and final item here in terms of things to look at is we need to reposit and promote best habits and performances. So this chart's pretty interesting in that it's a sales report, a scoreboard for individual effort. This I would call it a scorecard, but this shows the number of appointments that this person had in different revenue ranges. It shows the number of quotes they had in different revenue ranges. It shows the number of phone calls they made in different types of calls, and a variety of other attributes here, the number of emails they sent and so on. But the really cool thing about this, again, there are no results on here. This is just all activities. And the cool thing about measuring activities, it's the one thing that we control. None of us control, looking at sales, we don't control when someone buys or they don't buy. We can certainly accelerate it or decelerate it based on our activities, but we don't control that. The only thing that this salesperson controls is what they do every day. And so the cool thing about this measurement is, number one, the salesperson can do it themselves. Two is that it is 100, they control every piece of this, and we want to allow them to control every piece of this. And it's highly visible. It allows them to assign some points to each of these activities, and so they come up with some cumulative score about what they did. And it looks like the quotes are half points versus the project appointments on the top part. And so there's some weighting that we're not seeing in this that's creating the scores on the right-hand column. But again, the whole idea is that we can now go and have reference points, not only for the individual, we can have it for all the other salespeople currently in the team, and we can give these reference points to any future salespeople. Let's just say this was the best weekly score ever. This now becomes a benchmark for the current group, plus any new hires and any additional people that come onto the team. And so this can be used in a whole variety of ways. But first and foremost, to inform the individual, but then to inform everybody else in the team. Likewise, everybody else in the team are creating uh, sort of their activity scoreboards, are informing us as well. So we want to be able to stand on the shoulders of those who have come before us. That's really the intent of this particular goal, is that we want to make sure that we gain all of the institutional knowledge from past performers, from past cohorts and so on, and that we're able to see further, jump higher, run faster because of those experiences. And we don't want to have to start at the beginning. We've lost all the efficiency and all that potential energy, and we want to make sure we capture that. So a couple of case studies that might be interesting, and each one of these case studies has a couple of different components, but should really reinforce what we're talking about here. So the first one has to do, and really the ultimate point here is around stage gates. And for those that don't know what stage gates are, they're various points within a continuum or a process where we're going to stop and measure and decide whether or not either an idea goes forward, or an individual or a team goes forward to the next stage. So it's sort of incremental opportunities or growth that have decision points at the transition from one stage to the next. And so there are a couple of business accelerators that have used stage gates in some very interesting ways. And I'm going to specifically highlight Northeastern University, their Idea Accelerator, but also very similar to this is the Nashville Entrepreneur Center, which is probably one of the top 5 accelerators in the country. Really amazing group. But let me just walk you through what Northeastern does. So they have 3 stages in their accelerator. They have a ready stage that has certain attributes to it, and this is where ventures that come to them start, and then they have the set stage, which is sort of getting ready for market, and then they have the go stage, essentially ready for investment. And as we look at these, what happens when somebody or a venture is coming to the end of the ready stage? They do a 30-minute pitch, and then there's a process to decide whether essentially the pitch and where they are has them prepared and ready to go to the set stage. And if they're not in an adequate place, then they continue in the ready stage. If they are ready to move on, then they move to the set stage. But the idea being that there are transitions that happen. And besides the sort of physical transition, that sort of promotion that happens, which is, we all love badges and to be rewarded and awarded. The other thing that happens is, as they move to that next stage, is that they get access to new and more valuable resources. So as they move to set, there are all sorts of sources that become available because they're now at a more mature stage. They're being more responsible. They're being compliant to the program and to the process. And so there is a correspondence of, if you will, effort, results, and resources. And sort of, you think of rights and responsibilities. This is people who are being more responsible, or ventures in this case that are being more responsible and doing better, and they get more rights. They get more ability to perform. And so they cruise along in the set stage, getting more and more done, and they move on to the next stage, which is solution design pitch, they go to a business model pitch. And if that is successful, and they go, there's a rubric and a decision process here. If they're successful in that pitch, then they move on to the go stage, where again additional resources become available that amplify their trajectory. And so in each case, sort of the corresponding effort and results are matched with corresponding opportunity and resources. And so everything expands, the access, the network, all that expands. And again, the stage gate process can be applied not just in venture accelerators at universities and out in the ecosystem. It can be applied with any type of sales team, or even in an educational model. The idea being that we want to apply our resources to those that are moving, essentially being compliant to the process and moving forward through it. And while we appreciate the fact that some aren't moving as quickly, the goal, number one, isn't to reward that necessarily, but it's also to apply the resources where they can be best utilized. There's no organization with unlimited resources, so we want to make sure that whether it's management time or team time, or additional types of resources, access to equipment and capital and so on, we want to make sure that's preserved for those that are being most compliant and are moving forward most meaningfully. So, kind of in summary to this case study, we want to assign value to resources and privileges. We want to allocate these resources and privileges based on performance. And we want to promote and reward best performers, because again, those best performers, not only do we want to make sure that they understand that they're doing it right, and we want to reinforce that, but we also want to use them as an example for others, so that it's very easy for others to follow in their footsteps, to stand on their shoulders and move forward. So this next case study actually is very personal. It's something that we had a couple of really interesting experiences that I think will be fun to talk through. So we've done a fair amount of consulting. We've also owned a few businesses. And so back in our consulting days, we worked with a car dealership. Actually, they had 5 locations, about 400 employees, and we also owned a few different ice cream shops. And from these 2 experiences, we developed a tool that and a system and a process that we've actually used in every business sense, and we call it the employee self-management system. So let me tell you a little bit about sort of the beginning of this. So we were doing this consulting for this car dealership, and they were transitioning from being a family-owned business to being an employee-owned business. And part of what we were doing was doing team training for all 400 employees, so they could learn how to better work in cross-functional and multifunctional teams. And as we were doing this, we were, one of the many classes that we did, we were learning about how they recognize good performers. And so it was really interesting. And I remember in one of the classes asking, what do you guys do internally to recognize good performers? And so somebody shouted out, we have a Employee of the Month program. And so, okay, well, great. Let's talk a little bit about that. Let's learn about it. So I had everybody that was in the class, and there were, in this particular class, may have been like 20 or 25 people. And I had everybody that was in the class raise their hand if they had been an Employee of the Month. And, of the 20 or 25 people, maybe 5 people raised their hands. And so I went to each of those 5 people and I said, that's great. You were an Employee of the Month. What was it that made you an Employee of the Month? What did you do? Why is it you were an Employee of the Month? And not one person could tell me why they were an Employee of the Month. And then I went to every other, I opened it up to the rest of the room and said, gosh, you've got some Employees of the Month here in the room. Does anybody know why they were Employee of the Month? And not one person could tell me either why they themselves were an Employee of the Month, or why one of their peers was an employee of the month. And so you think of that as my goodness, what's the point of this program? It's not reinforcing any known behavior. And so it really has very limited, if not zero value, if people don't know why they're recognized. And so that experience was really interesting to see. And so that was sort of one data point as we were looking at that. And that sort of theme ended up repeating itself many times over as we saw organizations doing sort of similar things for a couple of years, and we owned these ice cream businesses, and our ice cream got delivered in tubs that looked just like this. Well, one day had a couple of shipments of ice cream every week, and normally we'd get, during the summer, 20 or 25 tubs on a given. And so this one day we got our 20 or 25 tubs, and one of our newer employees had the delivery person put the tubs of ice cream in the walk-in refrigerator. And so we have 9 freezers and one big, massive walk-in refrigerator. Well, for anyone that knows anything about the melting point of ice cream, a refrigerator is not the best place to put ice cream. And so, of course, that was a later afternoon delivery, and no one caught it until the next morning when the shop was being set up for the next day's customers. And so, yeah, needless to say, the ice cream was unusable at that point. It was essentially 20 or 25 tubs of throwaway liquid. And so, it's funny, as we were debriefing about this internally, we said, geez, yeah, it's a problem. The gal who received the ice cream felt terrible. We didn't feel all that good about it. And ultimately it was something where we, thinking back to Dr. Deming and his ideas is, we started to sort of talk through, why would this have happened? How did we fail? We didn't feel that this employee failed. How did we fail? And how do we sort of prevent this from happening in the future? How do we build an infrastructure that helps this not happen before? And I think part of the rationale was we did a little soul searching, and we said, do we believe that this employee came in wanting to do the business harm? I mean, was it like, this employee? We have full faith in our team that, no, and this is actually a true Taco Bell employee doing this. This was on Facebook. Tragic. But we had none of that illusion that our team was at all malicious. This gal felt terrible, and the rest of her teammates did as well. And so, our notion was, this person came in, and all of our team, we feel or felt, as they're leaving their house to come to work, is coming in hoping to do a great job. We are very confident they're not coming in hoping to really do a crummy job. And so if we go with that assumption, how do we build an infrastructure that helps them do an awesome job? How do we help them, self-actualize and get the most out of this experience that they can, and to be really excited and rewarded? And so we developed this employee self-management system. And this is just a very simple, light version, just to give an example. But ultimately, what manifests itself, and we actually engaged the employees in helping us refine this, and it became, we sort of launched a version 1 and evolved it over sort of a 3 to 6 month period. And again, we've sort of now learned how to do this better and better with each organization we've started and worked with. But ultimately, it's really about having a scorecard of potential activities, and then having some kind of value to each of those activities, and then the individuals keeping track of what they did during their shift each day, and any additional notes, and creating a total. But the goal is sort of at the end of the day, that they've got some way to communicate their production. And so, kind of our goal was, when the lights are off and there's no one here to tell you what to do, how are you going to make those decisions? And our goal was really not to be needed as managers, as owners. We wanted to work ourselves out of a job, and the better that we could train people, the better that we could inform them and help them make decisions, we felt the better they would perform. And that was exactly what happened. So they would fill out this individual scorecard that would roll up into a very central, very public weekly, in our case, a weekly and a monthly scorecard. And they would be able to see how they did. Not only they did each sort of week to week, but they could see how they did versus their peers. And then we would have a real rationale, a very defensible way to have an employee of the month, and one that actually acted as information and guidance for not just the person who was rewarded and recognized, but everybody else in the team. And suddenly we ended up with a few folks who had real strengths in certain areas, and the rest of the team quickly learned those strengths, mimicked those people, modeled that behavior, and the whole, as we talked about earlier, the tide rose and helped everybody elevate their game. And so it was amazing, because we had people who were better cleaners, or we had people that were better at decorating ice cream cakes, or whatever it was. And before you knew it, other people were watching, they were asking questions, and they were sort of connecting the dots so that their performance came up to a much, much better level, because they had very tangible, contextual examples of ways that they could improve their performance. So really the goal here, and we see so many organizations resisting pointing out sort of reference points, and I think if it's done in a way that people are engaged in, that is reliable and people have faith in, it's phenomenal. It creates incredible reference points, and ultimately, the goal here isn't to dismiss people. The goal is to put people in situations for which they can be successful. And so we as leaders need to have both the methodologies to do that, but also the will to do that. It's more than just the system. We have to have the will to sort of both be open and engaging into evolving that, because nothing like this launches out of the gate perfectly. But then it's really about holding the team to those standards, and again, it's all about helping people create that success. So with this case study, really what we want to convey is we want to build the ability for effective self-direction. So it's not just self-direction, but it's effective self-direction. It's people who can very easily know when there's no one there to tell them what to do. What do? So they can be very productive and make decisions when they need to make decisions that are in line with the organization's goals and the sort of fundamental principles of the organization. We need to have immediate, clear, and actionable feedback for not just the current performers, but the future performers, and that feedback should be not just on an individual basis, but on a relative basis. We should know where we stand in certain performance areas versus our peers, because those peers are informing us. If somebody's performing better than us in something, we can ask them questions, we can model them, we can watch them, we can do all sorts of things that allow us to sort of steal that good performance and begin owning it and making it our own. So again, sort of the idea of modeling success so that not just the current but the future performers gain benefit of that. The key here is we want to help people get to that finish line. We want to help them. The challenge of a lot of this stuff, and we've gone from over the last 50, 60 years, we've gone from a manufacturing economy to a intangible or service economy. And in the manufacturing economy, it was really easy to know how you did each day, right? You'd see a product, you'd see output, you'd see a number of widgets that you we're a part of creating. And today you don't have those same kind of satisfactions. And so, and this has always been true in sales. You don't have that tangibility in education. Quite often, you don't have that tangibility until there's a test. And so, the more you can create these sort of benchmarks, these baseline standards, the more you can help people find success, and ultimately that's what we want to do. We want to help them get to that best finish line they can, and give them the sort of the best practices, and reinforce and enforce those best practices on how to get there. So we're going to pop out for questions in just a second, but I want to make sure you knew when our next webinar is and what the topic is. It's actually a month from today, the 19th, so Thursday, January 19th. And the topic is going to be, and this is the second in this series, the entrepreneur community's crazy focus on investment versus customers. And this is one we've been thinking about for quite a while. We saw many examples of maybe a better path that we'd advocate, and so that's going to be a fun one to talk through. And I know there are folks that are listening to this now that this topic is going to be really interesting for. So we want to make sure that we help everybody get focused so it's most effective. So I'm going to stop the sharing and come back on screen, and we'll see if we can answer the questions that were posed. So 1 second here, just coming back. Okay, how is everybody? Hope you're all doing great. So I'm just going to pick up the questions here, and we'll see what we have. So these are questions that were posed before when you all registered. And again, feel free to submit additional questions in the chat box. But the first question is, how do you make guidelines flexible enough to provide structure but not inhibit innovative thinking? So yeah, I think this is a really interesting question. We certainly don't want to create a situation where people are stuck and can't be innovative. On the other hand, we don't want to lose what we gained and what we've gained by providing, whether it's the teaching we've been doing or the systems we've been employing. We don't want to lose that. The funny thing is, more often than not, we see people sacrificing, wanting to be sort of open to sort of the laissez-faire management, and then paying the price for it in terms of results and performance, when they knew exactly what people should be doing, and really did not hold them to that standard. So I guess that to answer this succinctly, what I would suggest is that new performers, you want to bring in and get into a system, whatever that is. If it's a certain variety of sort of short timeline assignments, whether it's certain daily activities, but you want to get them in the right rut. You want to teach them, you don't have to worry about performing well if you perform these things every day. We don't have to worry about your success if you do this. And then once they get over a certain threshold in terms of success, not time, but the actual performance related success, is that you begin allowing them to have some flexibility in what they do. And so if you think of this as sort of that stage gate case study, but really about having stage gates. Once they perform to a certain level, you give certain latitudes, and then if the performance dips or there are some other issues, you can bring them back into those standards. But ultimately, I think what I would suggest is that you, number one, your first responsibility is to assure their success. So get them into performance standards that cause that. And then and have this systemic, so that when they get above a certain level, they can work from home or whatever flexibilities you might offer. But that doesn't happen until they've hit those standards. And again, it's that right comes with responsibilities, and it's not a permanent right. It is one they earn every period, whether it's weekly, monthly, on some periodic basis. And again, when you see the warning signs, you pull that back in and get them back in the right rut and get them performing well. Let's see, how do we quantify training impact? I think there are a lot of ways. There are, most of us quantify them as sort of trailing indicators, right? We see the results some months after training happens. We see, better sales performance. We see, better customer service or whatnot. There are some ways to have leading indicators. An example, and this again is intended to be sales oriented, but our tool gives some leading indicators of that. In other words, if you're learning how to communicate, then our Test My Pitch tool actually measures your ability to communicate over a period of time as you practice. And so we're able to actually see not only how people are today, but where they evolve to over a series of practices, so that we can not just validate the training, which is important, but we want to validate that will represent us well out in the marketplace. Because the worst thing, it's neat to know how the training's doing, but it seems even more important to know that we're being represented how we intend to be represented out in the marketplace. We don't have, we need to have people that can communicate our value proposition, that can properly communicate with customers and resolve issues and satisfy needs and so on. And so, I think I would suggest you want to not just look at sort of the traditional trailing indicators, which are sort of what results do we have, but I think you want to look at some leading indicators, which would be what behaviors changed because of this training. Let's see, trainers give us feedback on participation and perceived ability. Are they ready to represent the brand? So I think what this is asking, and I apologize if I'm misunderstanding your question, please ping me a note and we'll chat through it. But so it says trainers give us feedback on participation and perceived ability. Are they ready to represent the brand? So I think this is asking the trainers trying to discern whether a specific individual is ready to talk to customers or to get out and communicate with the marketplace. And I think we want to make sure that that's really the first thing we want to assure, is that anyone we put into a situation that they are going to be out in the marketplace, that they can be successful. We want to, it's partially about preserving our brand, but we also hired this person for a reason, and we want to. It's our job to make sure that we give them the tools, we give them the preparation, and we set them up so that they have the highest likelihood of being successful. So yes, I would say our trainers need to give us feedback and evaluate that exactly, and evolve the programs that they deliver so that we better enhance individuals' ability to represent our brand, to be ambassadors of our institution. Let's see, the next one. How often should we give feedback to the team, and should everyone be on the same protocol? I would suggest everybody in like roles is on the same protocol, and depending on the situation, I think in some roles, daily feedback is absolutely spot on. In others, maybe it's weekly. I think the longest I would want to go is monthly in terms of formal feedback. But a lot of us think of feedback as an oral conversation. The feedback I'm talking about is feedback that actually is it may have some qualitative aspects to it, but it's even more quantitative. The first is to measure activities, and those are going to be quantitative. And then from there, we could go into all sorts of qualitative discussion or assessment. But I think the first thing is going to be quantitative. So to answer the question, it somewhat depends on the role. It could be anywhere from daily to maybe monthly. But if we're not giving feedback, and again, this is sort of formal, hopefully we're communicating some feedback, sort of every day when we're talking to people. But I would say on a formal basis, no more than once, or no less than once a month, but maybe as much as once a day. And it may be self-assessment. It may be self. Let's see, we work with companies in various industries. How do we make programming valuable for all of them? Well, I think programming needs to be audience-centered. So I think ultimately the first thing to do is to do a needs assessment of that audience and find out where their challenges are, where their needs are, and provide programming and content that satisfies that. I see that we're pretty close to the end of the hour. We only have a couple more questions, so please just hang with me. How do we get everyone on the same page, developing our projects and working more efficiently to achieve goals? Well, I think I would start with the goals that need to be achieved, and then make sure you have the right players to accomplish those goals. So anything like this starts with staffing. Are you interviewing well? Are you interviewing and bringing the right people on that can do and will do that role? And then, of course, building kind of what we spent our time on today is building that infrastructure that helps those people do the activities that will cause the outcomes and success that you're looking for. This question may be pretty similar. How do we integrate staff into the organization and increase the functionality of all? I think that's along the same lines. Again, start with the outcomes you're looking for, hire the right people, and then give them the tools and have the will to use those tools and to cause them to use the tools and processes to do the activities that create the outcome. Whew. This is hot stuff. Let's see, just a couple more here, just two more. Motivating my team to work. Okay, so this is going to be really similar. Motivating my team to work on tasks that they would not normally work on or don't want to work on, but need to work on in order to help our department become a high-functioning marketing engine. Again, I think this is along the same lines. If we know what we want to or need to do as a department or an enterprise, then we need to have, sort of hire the right people and give them the right infrastructure, and again, have the will to support them, not placate them, but support them in creating those outcomes. You think of really good sports teams, practice isn't an option. It's not like, I'm a member of a professional sports team. I'm not sure I'll go to practice today. I'm not sure I'll, sort of prepare to be successful at our next game, or that I'll be prepared to play with my teammates well. If you're on the team, there are certain expectations, and it's this may not be what you want to do, and that's okay. Let's have that conversation. But if this is what you want to do, these are the things we need to do, because that we've agreed this is the outcome we want. So let's get going on the path that gets us there. Again, we've agreed we want to go to New York. We better be on I-95 South or something that looks like it, something that's somewhat parallel. Let's see. So. And then what's the balance between leadership and management? Yeah, I think that's always a good question. So, I think leadership is really, and this is probably boiling it down to kind of the simplest way to look at it, but I'd say leadership is really first about evolving the decision, and that may be sort of, or I shouldn't say evolving the decision, evolving the direction or the outcomes. And that may be a collaborative effort. It may be a more sort of centralized effort to make that determination. And then management is really about the process to get there. And managers, sort of are much more hands-on and day-to-day in the sort of prosecution of sort of making those outcomes happen. So I'm sure there are more eloquent descriptions, but that's my maybe quick description of leadership and management. So in any event, it has been a true pleasure to be with you today. Hope hopefully there's been some good information here for you. I'd love to certainly invite any questions if there's something we can do to help offline. If you have questions about our tools, we'd be happy to answer any of that. We will be sending out a note in the next day, 2 days, with a link to this webinar. So if you'd like to share it with others, or you'd like to rewatch any part, please do. If you want to like it or make comments on the webinar we send it out, please do. Certainly any comments you want to email us directly, let us know, and we hope to have a conversation with you and learn more about your organization when time allows. We're almost to the Christmas holiday for those that are getting ready to celebrate Christmas or are celebrating Hanukkah, or any of the other year-end holidays. We certainly wish you all a wonderful holiday, and hope to talk to you all soon. Thanks so much. Enjoy the rest of your day. Bye for now.